He said, your relatives have tried to save you. They're still trying to save you. And we can't have that, so we have to kill you.
A name was whispered in fear for decades: Yakov Yurovsky. He was the man who oversaw the final dark night of the Romanov dynasty. His personal account was thought to be lost to history until now. A recently discovered journal, confirmed to be his, has been opened. And what it says about the Romanovs is worse than anyone imagined. It's not just a confession. It's a blueprint of a horrifying secret, detailing a coded message and a cover-up that has lasted for over 100 years. We are about to reveal what was really in that diary. Yurovsky's Lost Pages. The story begins not in the bloody chaos of 1918, but in the sterile silence of the present day. It happened in Yekaterinburg, Russia, the very same city where the Romanovs vanished from the world. Inside the dim, temperature-controlled archives of the State Historical Museum, a junior archivist was doing a routine inventory. Her name was Elena Petrova, and she was cataloging old, seemingly unimportant documents from the Revolution. So here's the deal. She was assigned to a section that hadn't been touched in decades. It was full of dusty boxes labeled Ural Regional Soviet. Most of it was boring supply ledgers and meeting minutes. But one crate was different. It was a sealed wooden box tucked in the darkest corner of the shelf. It wasn't on her inventory sheet. Curiosity got the best of her. She pried it open. The air inside smelled like old leather and dust. Inside lay scattered notes, a few rusted tools, and at the very bottom, a book. It was a dark, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stiff. The pages were brittle, yellowed by a century of silence, but the signature on the inside cover was unmistakable, written in a strong, deliberate hand, Y.M. Yurovsky. At first, it seemed like a routine, if exciting, find. What most people don't realize is that some of Yurovsky's writings were already known. He had written official reports and memoirs published in the 1920s. But this was different. This wasn't a polished report for his superiors. The handwriting matched, but the tone was raw, unedited, and personal. As Petrova, her hands trembling slightly, turned the pages, she realized she wasn't reading an official account. She was reading a confession. And then she saw it. Tucked carefully between two pages, dated July 16, 1918, the night before the event, was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a telegram. The ink had almost vanished, but under the archive's lights, fragments were visible. It was written in a short cipher. When experts later examined it, the truth sent a shockwave through the academic world. The message, once decoded, was chilling. Proceed with implementation. No exceptions. Remove all evidence. The heirs must not awaken. This was the bombshell. Historians have argued for 100 years about who gave the final order. The official Soviet narrative always claimed the decision was made by the local Ural Soviet on their own because the White Army was closing in. They claimed they had no time to wait for orders from Moscow. But this telegram hinted at something else, a direct order, a conspiracy. But who was the man who kept this secret? Who was Yakov Yurovsky? He wasn't some random soldier. He was a man of intense, terrifying contradictions. Born in 1878 in Siberia, he was the son of a Jewish watchmaker. And get this background is the key. Living under the Tsarist regime, his family faced constant discrimination. He grew up watching the empire he lived in deny his people basic rights. It's no wonder he was drawn to the revolution. But here's the catch. He wasn't a wild-eyed anarchist. He was a watchmaker's son. He was quiet, methodical, precise, and deeply introspective. His colleagues in the Bolshevik Party described him as coldly efficient, the kind of man you give a job to when you need it done perfectly, with no questions asked and no mess left behind. He was a photographer, a watchmaker, and a revolutionary. He was a man who understood how complex things worked, from tiny gears to political movements. When the Romanovs were sent to Yekaterinburg, Yurovsky was put in charge of their confinement at the Ipatiev House, a place that would soon be known as the House of Special Purpose. This was no accident. The previous commandant was removed because he was seen as too friendly with the imperial family. Yurovsky was sent in to be the hard hand. He was known for his discipline and, more importantly, for his silence. He followed orders precisely, leaving no trace of doubt. At least that's what everyone thought. His new diary tells a different story. It shows that on the inside, something was fracturing. He wrote about sleepless nights, about the weight of his task. He noted in one entry that he could feel the weight of ghosts in the hallways even before the night of July 17th. In the diary, he described the family, not as monarchs, but as people. He described the former Tsar Nicholas as a simple, almost weak man. He wrote about the Empress, Alexandra, with cold disdain, calling her arrogant. But the children were different. He described the youngest, Anastasia, as curious and almost fearless. That one detail, that one human observation, makes the later pages of the diary almost impossible to read. The discovery of this diary changes everything. It's not just another historical document, it's the private, haunted words of the man at the center of the storm. And that coded telegram, the one bearing the cryptic phrase, "The heirs must not awaken," takes on a horrifying new dimension. It wasn't just an order to end a dynasty. It was a command to erase a family, to ensure the Romanov bloodline would never, ever rise again. And the diary reveals in Yurovsky's own hand that he was haunted by it until his very last breath. But the telegram held one more secret, a single letter that could change history. The lie of the Ural Soviet. The telegram is where this story turns from a historical tragedy into a dark political thriller. It wasn't just what it said, but who it came from. The note was folded tightly, the paper so fragile it threatened to turn to dust. As we said, the decrypted message was cold. Proceed with implementation. No exceptions. Remove all evidence. The heirs must not awaken. 4 sentences. No names, no flowery language, just a cold, hard command. But at the very bottom, next to the decoded message, Yurovsky himself had made a small notation in his diary. A single cryptic initial, V. And get this. In July 1918, in the chaotic heart of the Bolshevik Revolution, there were only a handful of men who could give such an order. But there was only one V with the authority to confirm an act of this magnitude. Vladimir Lenin. This is the smoking gun historians have been searching for. For a century, the official story was a firewall. The state archives, the approved history books, even the accounts of other Bolsheviks, all claimed the same thing. The decision to eliminate the Romanovs was made by the local Ural Soviet. The narrative was perfect. They were supposedly in a panic, with the anti-Bolshevik White Army just miles away. They feared the Tsar would be rescued and become a rallying symbol. So they acted alone. It was a local necessity. But here's the catch. That story always had problems, and this diary with its coded telegram blows it apart. The tone of the message, detached, coded, commanding, doesn't sound like a panicked local committee. It sounds like a finalized order from Central Command, from Moscow. Yurovsky's diary doesn't outright state Lenin ordered it. He was far too careful for that. But his notes shift dramatically after that page. His handwriting, usually so precise, becomes rushed, uneven. He writes, "Confirmation received from Moscow, not from the local council." From Moscow. He then writes, "The meaning of no witnesses is clear. The house will be silent by dawn." This is a massive wow factor. It suggests Yurovsky was waiting for this specific confirmation. He wasn't acting on his own, he was an instrument. He was the final gear in the watch, and someone in Moscow, someone with the initial V, had just wound the key. Of course, scholars have tried to debunk this. Some argue V could be a cipher prefix, just part of the code. Others suggest it could refer to a regional military code name. But the coincidence is too great, especially given what Yurovsky writes later. In a later entry, long after the event, he refers to the order from above, signed by a man whose name I will not write. Why not write it? Because even in his private diary, even years later, that name held too much power. It was too dangerous to put on paper. Elena Petrova, the archivist who found the diary, said in a later interview that the more she read, the more she felt Yurovsky's words shifting from a factual record to a deep personal confession. He wasn't just recording history, he was trying to make peace with himself. He was trying to justify the fact that he had obeyed. Think about the weight of that. To eliminate an entire family, not just the Tsar, but his wife, his sick son, and his 4 daughters. You need to believe it's for a greater good. But what if you have a piece of paper that proves it wasn't your idea? That you were just a tool? That's a powerful justification. It's also a terrifying one. In one chilling passage from late July, just days after the event, Yurovsky writes, "We carried out the command. But when the silence came, it was not victory. It was a sound I will never forget. The kind that makes the heart beg to stop beating." That line, "the sound I will never forget," appears just before his detailed account of the event itself. And that's putting it lightly. It reads less like a report and more like a trauma, replayed over and over again in ink. Even the structure of his diary changes. The once neat pages become smeared and chaotic, as if written by a man whose hand was shaking. He mentions the room, the smell of gunpowder, the echo of crying. Then he writes, "The telegram was burned, but its words burned deeper still." But if he burned it, how did this copy survive? That's the mystery. Experts believe Yurovsky may have hidden this carbon copy, or perhaps a transcribed copy, inside his diary before he destroyed the original. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to erase it entirely. Maybe, just maybe, some part of him wanted the truth to be found. Someone someday who would finally understand that what happened in that basement wasn't just an act of revolutionary rage, it was an orchestration. Because according to the final lines in his diary, he wrote, "History will say we did this, but the truth will say we obeyed." And that difference between acting and obeying is what makes the next part of his diary so absolutely horrifying. The diary was about to detail the night itself, and it was worse than any history book ever dared to print. The road to the mine. What Yurovsky wrote next is the dark heart of the diary. For years, official records described the event as a swift, almost sterile act of revolutionary justice. But here's the deal. Yurovsky's private words paint a picture of utter chaos, panic, and a horrifyingly botched procedure that stretched into an eternity. His entry for the night of July 17th begins with a clock time, 1:10 in the morning. He writes that he woke the family abruptly. He told them they were being moved for their own safety. The city was restless, he lied, and they needed to go to the basement. The diary describes their walk. Nicholas carried his sick son, Alexei, who couldn't walk. The Empress and her daughters followed, carrying pillows and their small dogs. The crazy part is they had no idea. They were annoyed. They were tired, but they weren't afraid. Not yet. Yurovsky describes the room. It was small, barely 25 feet by 21 feet. It was a semi-basement with a low vaulted ceiling and one single dim light bulb. He ordered chairs for the Empress and Alexei. The rest stood. Yurovsky then brought in his squad. 11 men, armed with a mix of weapons, crowding into the tiny space with the 11 prisoners. He wrote that he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. He read the order from the Ural Soviet, the official justification. The moment he finished, Nicholas turned to him confused and asked, "What?" Yurovsky didn't answer. He raised his weapon. And then, he wrote, the noise began. The diary's tone completely breaks. The handwriting becomes jagged, frantic. The next paragraphs are a torrent of smeared ink and corrections. The event was supposed to be quick. Each man had one target, but it wasn't quick. The room filled with thick, acrid smoke from the weapon discharges. The men couldn't see. The projectiles started ricocheting off the brick walls, and worse, they were ricocheting off the daughters. This is a wow factor that historians knew, but Yurovsky's diary gives it a horrifying personal perspective. He wrote, "The rounds, they bounced like peas. I could not understand it. What he didn't know was that the Empress and her daughters had sewn over 18 pounds of diamonds and jewels into their clothing. Their corsets had become crude, deflective armor. The screaming. "I had not anticipated the screaming," Yurovsky wrote, his hand steadying again as if forcing himself to be clinical. "Alexei still moved after the first volley. I had to end it myself. The boy looked at me. His eyes..." There's a break in the text here. A blank space where Yurovsky clearly stopped writing. When he resumes, his tone is mechanical. "It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes for silence to return to that room. An eternity." He details how Maria and Anastasia survived the first volley huddled in the corner. He wrote that one of his men, his nerves clearly gone, attacked them with a bayonet. The diary spares no detail. "The sounds," he wrote. "There are no words for the sounds." The official report Yurovsky filed later was clean. This diary entry was the nightmare. It was the truth. But the horror wasn't over. In fact, what came next was in many ways even worse. The second part of the implementation began. Remove all evidence. The diary then describes the frantic, panicked, and shockingly incompetent effort to dispose of the bodies. Yurovsky and his men loaded the remains onto a truck. Their plan was to take them to a remote, abandoned mine in the Koptyaki forest about 9 miles away. It was a disaster. The truck got stuck in the mud. The men were exhausted, terrified, and some were drunk. Yurovsky wrote with fury about their total failure of discipline. They spent 3 days in the forest, trying to hide what they had done. The diary describes the gruesome process. They tried to burn the remains. When that failed, they used sulfuric acid. Yurovsky, the precise watchmaker, recorded the exact amount of acid used. He was a man documenting a procedure, trying to maintain control in a situation that had descended into a medieval nightmare. He wrote about how he had to personally take charge, separating 2 of the bodies, later identified as Alexei and one of his sisters, and burying them separately, trying to confuse anyone who might find the main grave. What most people don't realize is that this frantic, failed disposal is what allowed the remains to be found decades later. The evidence was not removed. It was just badly, brutally hidden. Yurovsky's entry for this period is filled with self-justification, but also with a new, creeping dread. He wrote, "I thought ending a czar would free Russia. Instead, it has bound us to the ghosts we made." He ended the main entry for that night with one final, haunting line, written in darker ink as if pressed hard enough to tear the page. "The heirs did not awaken, but neither did I." Those words connect everything. The coded telegram, the haunting phrase, and the torment that would follow Yurovsky and every man in that room for the rest of their lives. But the diary wasn't just his confession, it was an archive of their shared trauma. Echoes from an empty room. After the gunfire ended, a new kind of silence began, and for Yakov Yurovsky it was a punishment. He wrote in his diary that for weeks the sound of that room clung to him. The echo, the smell of gunpowder, and the weight of what was left behind. The basement at the Apatiev house was scrubbed, the walls plastered, the floors bleached. Officially, nothing had happened there, but unofficially, something had broken in every man who was present. In his diary, Yurovsky called the days that followed a procession of shadows. He detailed how several of his men began drinking heavily, refusing to speak of the event. One of them, a man named Medvedev, reportedly confessed in a moment of drunken despair that he could still hear the girls whenever he closed his eyes. Another soldier was said to have burned his uniform, claiming the smell of smoke would never leave it. The Soviet leadership in Moscow ordered complete secrecy. The press was told a sanitized lie. The Tsar had been dispatched by the decision of the people, but his wife and children were moved to a secure location. This lie would fuel rumors for decades, giving rise to imposters like Anna Anderson, who claimed to be the lost Anastasia. The crazy part is, the Bolsheviks needed this ambiguity. They wanted the Tsar gone, but they were afraid of the public backlash if the world knew they had eliminated the children. Yurovsky's own official report was a model of Bolshevik efficiency. It was concise, unemotional, and stripped of any mention of the chaos, the jewels, or the 20-minute nightmare. But in the private pages of his diary, he couldn't lie. "They said it was justice," he wrote, "but justice would have looked them in the eyes. We acted in darkness." He described his own sleepless nights. He claimed he saw Anastasia in the corner of his room, her eyes not afraid, just confused, just as he'd noted before. At first, he dismissed it as exhaustion. Later, he called it a curse made of memory. And here's the deal. Yurovsky wasn't the only one haunted. Tucked between the diary's final pages were several folded letters. Their paper was even more fragile than the diary itself. Elena Petrova, the archivist, carefully unfolded the first one. It was addressed to Yurovsky, dated August 19, 18, just weeks after the event. The first crack in the dam wasn't a gunshot, it was the whisper from a piece of paper. The letter, buried deep within Yakov Yurovsky's private diary, was from a soldier named Viktor Netrobin, one of the men in the squad. This wasn't an official report. This was a confession, a plea from a drowning man. His handwriting was crude, almost childlike, the letters thick and uneven as if pressed onto the page by a trembling hand. But his message was terrifyingly clear. "Comrade Yurovsky," it began, "I write to you because I cannot sleep. Every night their faces. You told us we were ending enemies of the people, but enemies do not beg like that girl begged. Enemies do not cry for their mother. I am drinking to forget, but the vodka only makes the memories louder. It burns my throat, but it cannot burn away what I see. What have we done, comrade? What have we done? What does a man like Yurovsky, a man of iron will and revolutionary fervor, do with a letter like that? Does he burn it? Does he report Netrobin for weakness?" The diary is chillingly silent. There was no record of Yurovsky's reply, but the very next item tucked onto the following page tells its own story. It's a small, yellowed newspaper clipping from 1919. It's not a headline, just a minor notice from a regional paper. It announced Viktor Netrobin's end. It was a self-inflicted act, the paper said. He had been found in his barracks, a victim of his own despair. Another casualty of the revolution. Yurovsky had taped it into his diary. No comment, no note, just the clipping. Was it a trophy, or was it a warning to Ross to himself? Netrobin wasn't the only one. His was just the first voice to cry out. Elena found 3 more letters, all from members of the squad, each one a different shade of torment. They paint a horrifying portrait of men slowly being destroyed by the act they committed. Another man, his name smudged, wrote, "The youngest one. She grabbed my arm. She thought I was helping her up. She had a little dog. She worried about the dog. When I raised my arm, she thought I was helping her instead." The sentence just trails off, the ink blot that follows speaking louder than any word could. A third letter is different. It's angry, defensive. "We did what the revolution demanded," the man wrote. "They were parasites. We did our duty." But the lines are shaky, the words duty and revolution are underlined so many times they nearly tear through the paper. It reads less like a statement of fact and more like a man trying to convince himself. These scraps of paper, hidden for decades, are a window into a collective nightmare. Some, like Yurovsky, buried themselves in continued service to the Soviet cause. They used ideology as armor against their conscience. If the party deemed it necessary, then it was necessary. The screams, the begging, the sheer human terror in that basement room, it was all just static, the unfortunate noise of building a new world. They wrapped themselves in the flag and the doctrine, and it kept the ghosts at bay. For a time. Others, like Netrobin, had no such armor. They were simple soldiers who had been told they were fighting a war, only to find themselves in a cellar with unarmed children. They couldn't reconcile their actions, and so they chose a permanent escape. And still others, their names lost to history, simply dissolved. They drowned in alcohol or madness, their names filling the records of state asylums and drunk tanks for years to come, long after the world had forgotten their names, but not the deed that broke them. Years later, as the Soviet Union stabilized, Yurovsky continued to work for the state. He was a model functionary. He was quiet, dutiful, and efficient. He pushed pencils. He filed reports. He attended meetings. He tried to bury his own conscience under a mountain of paperwork to smother the memory of that night with the mundane weight of bureaucracy. He never spoke publicly about that night again. But in 1934, one of his last diary entries shows a man still searching for peace, a man who understood the price of his actions. It's not a confession. It's a philosophical, terrible truth. "Revolution is not the absence of God," he wrote. "It is the creation of ghosts." When the diary was found, the page containing that single line had been folded over, a sharp crease pressed into the paper. It's as though even Yurovsky, the man who held the pen, couldn't bear to see it again. This is where we have to step back. People watching this are looking for the mystery, and the thing is, this diary provides it. But is it all true? Are we missing a key detail? This diary, this collection of confessions and clippings, raises so many questions. Could it be a forgery? Some historians have suggested it, claiming it's too perfect, too poetic, but the ink, the paper, the cross-referenced dates, and the handwriting all match Yurovsky's other undisputed state documents. If it's a fake, it's the most elaborate one in history. So if we accept it as real, what does it mean? It suggests the entire event was orchestrated from the top, a cold, calculated order. It proves the official story was a lie, and it shows the profound, agonizing human cost of obeying an inhuman order. Yurovsky's story isn't just about the end of a royal family. It's not just a footnote in a history book. It's a timeless, terrifying story about how revolutions and the ideologies that fuel them can turn moral certainty into moral blindness. He wasn't a monster born of fantasy. He was a man, a true believer who chose to follow orders and in doing so signed away his own soul. His final words, found on the back cover of the diary, are barely legible. Just a frantic scribble, the last testament of a man haunted. "They told me to make history. I made ghosts." So was Yurovsky a monster, or was he just a man following horrifying orders? And does that even make a difference? Let us know what you think. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that history tried to hide.